Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here, and the other day I had somewhat of an epiphany when I was thinking about the current Overwatch meta, and ones that had gone before, and it's disturbed me greatly. So, here I was thinking about video ideas. I thought back to the old metas like Beyblade, Dive and Goats, and I then got on to thinking about the new heroes in the game now. That's when it hit me. I think I know what the next meta, or possibly the one after, will be. And it's not good. During the course of this video, I will pick out some heroes that we've brought together at the end. Try and work out what they have in common while I go through this. So, to explain everything, we will have to have a history lesson. We have had two main metas since what I would call the golden age of Dive. These are the Goats and the Barrier metas that we are currently in. Now, a lot of people complained about the dominance of the Dive meta back a year and a half to 2 years ago. I would like to make a point that I was not one of them, but it was early days for me. If you don't remember or weren't playing the game at that time, Dive was where your team would be comprised of a Winston, D.Va, a hero who had dominated a lot of metas in Overwatch history, more on her later, a Lucio, a Zenyatta, a Genji, and a Tracer. You could mess around with the DPS or the supports a bit, but that was your main team comp. The team would jump onto a squishy target such as a healer with their high mobility with an aim to get the first pick in the fight. The enemy team would then try to counter-dive this in an attempt to keep their supports alive. It was a fairly high skill-based meta, which heavily relied on the skill of the individual players and the positioning. The thing is, Blizzard listened. They gave us Brigitte, the ultimate dive-conquering hero. Hell, in a reveal, she says, "I will be your shield," in reference to the more vulnerable heroes on the battlefield. She ultimately did her job. Too well. So it was the end of an era. Dive. A new era begins. The meta is thrown up into the air, and out of the ashes rises Brigitte and Goats. Refresher time. Goats, named after the contenders team who pioneered the team comp, was a lineup comprised of 3 tanks and 3 supports. Mainly this would be a Reinhardt, Zarya, D.Va, Lucio, Brigitte, and Ana. See the D.Vas come up again. This paved the way for the new dominant teams in the Overwatch esports scene, such as the Vancouver Titans, formerly Runaway, and the San Francisco Shock, with traditional dive teams like the London Spitfire, 2018 Overwatch League champions, finding it hard to adapt. On ladder, the meta dominated in the early days, and if you had the right sort of team, you could dominate matches. Goats, despite what Twitch chat or certain parts of the Overwatch community will tell you, required a magnificent amount of coordination. Yes, it may have looked like a ball of 6 heroes smashing into another ball of 6 heroes, but one wrong step from any member of that squad could mean doom for the entire push, especially at the highest level. But with the Goats meta came a lot of crowd control and boops, which made the game feel very frustrating at times. In the end, at the highest level, it became a case of which team could displace one of the enemy team members well enough to get the pick, instead of unforced errors. Whether it be a sleep dart from Ana, a whip shot or shield burst from the newly introduced Brigitte, or boots from D.Va, Lucio, or Reinhardt, ultimately CC would play a massive part in and very often determine who won the fight. This is why Goats was known as a very heavy CC-heavy meta, and for a lot of people, it was hard to play and hard to watch. Eventually, Goats became frowned upon on the ladder and became played much less, especially as team coordination on ladder is nothing like it is for pro teams. This meant that the pros were stuck playing Goats, and ladder were playing something completely different, creating a massive disconnect between the pro scene and the normal player base. Something had to change. Constant balance changes could not curb the scourge of the pro scene that was Goats, and although we did see some teams try to run different comps including triple DPS, things still didn't change at the highest level apart from some scenarios when you could run a Sombra instead of a D.Va. Once again, it was time for Blizzard to step in once more. Enter Role Lock. Something that had been called for across the Overwatch community for a very long time. Heralded as the saviour of the game, it was going to sort out poor team comps on ladder where people were unwilling to flex, but also rid the pro scene of Goats, where, at this point, every other avenue had failed. Of course, Goats was a 3 tank and 3 support comp, and in Role Lock, comprised of 2 tanks, 2 DPS and 2 supports, Goats wouldn't just fade out as a meta, it would die instantly, and painfully for some pro teams. Still with me? Remember when I said goats became frowned upon on ladder and before it was outlawed completely? Well, now the meta had been thrown up in the air again, but this time it was only for the pro scene. Ladder had already found its answer and the cavalry was here. Introducing Orisa, the new must-pick main tank. Orisa had been in the game for a long time at this point, but had seen little play due to other more preferable options on the roster such as Reinhardt and Winston. Over time, the devs had constantly buffed Orisa in an attempt to increase her pick rate. The constant buffs to the hero had finally been noticed, and she was thrust into the limelight as a pretty much must-pick most of the time. This was coupled with the release of Hero 30, Baptiste. Baptiste had a very powerful ability, Immortality Field, which does exactly what it says on the tin, making you immortal until it's either destroyed or times out. This in turn enables more bunker-like comps for Orisa to thrive in. This brought some much more niche heroes into play, such as Torbjorn and Bastion, as they were provided with extra protection from the Baptiste compared to being more susceptible to dive originally. We will come back to Baptiste later. So, we were in the grips of a bunker meta for a while, but this was soon to change and Hero 31 would have an even bigger implication on things than Baptiste did. So, we are getting towards the end of our history lesson here, with one final chapter to cover. Despite some minor changes to try and bring back the high Orisa pick rate, she was still very dominant, and she was only going to get more dominant with the introduction of a new melody. Hero 31, Sigma. By the dev's own words, Sigma is very good against bunker comps, and yes, his ultimate, Gravitic Flux, can displace an entire entrenched bunker comp very well. But the thing is, Sigma has a big experimental barrier, but it's not strong enough for a main tank, which is the role in which Blizzard envisaged him in. Couple this with an increase in the damage output of certain DPS heroes, which was originally introduced to try and curb goats, and people start thinking, we are struggling to keep our barrier up against this damage output. Well, hey, let's get 2 barriers then. Welcome to the barrier meta, which I would like to call Origma. Hitscan DPS pretty much have no chance against this tank line, with barriers up pretty much 24/7 if managed well. But now with Roll Lock, you have to pick some DPS. Enter DPS that either feed off barriers or ignore them completely, i.e. Symmetra, Doomfist, Reaper, and Pharah. Symmetra also adds to this barrier meta with her ult, by the way of making one hell of a light show. Just stand back and admire it, because you ain't gonna get much done. But hold on a minute. Why not play a flanker like Tracer and Genji to get around those barriers and counter it that way? You make a good point, dedicated Overwatch player in the audience over there. Hi. The thing is, Sigma has an ability called Accretion, where he can pull a rock out of the ground and CC any flankers coming around the back, dealing a large amount of damage and effectively shutting them down. He can also move his barrier to protect his backline. If those flankers are really causing you problems, you could also employ a vastly reworked Brigitte to deal with them. Also, let's not forget that Immortality Field from Baptiste. Yes, that's still around at this point. So, good luck trying to get a cheeky flanking pick. The recent meta changes since Dive have effectively rendered most flankers useless apart from Doomfist, so you can forget your Tracer and Genji. We will be coming back to Sigma in a minute. So we find ourselves at the present day and at the end of our history lesson. The question is, what have we learnt? Well, since the Dive meta, we have seen team comps that have been dominated by one main thing in their collective kits. Goats relied heavily on the CC available to the heroes in the comp, and the current Origma meta relies heavily on the amount of shield which can be provided by the tank line. So, what will the inevitable next meta heavily rely on? Well, at the start of this video, I said that I would pick out certain heroes that I would talk about that would come together at the end of the video. Did you take note of them? There were 3 heroes that I picked up: D.Va, Baptiste, and Sigma. The question is, what do they all have in common? It's all about abilities that have a common purpose. First of all, let's look at D.Va, the classic example of this. She has one of the most controversial abilities in the game, which has seen countless iterations over the course of the game's history, and even the devs themselves have said that if they were given their time over, they probably wouldn't have put the ability in the game. Yes, I am talking about Defense Matrix. Let's move on to our next hero, Baptiste. I have already talked about his kit in this video, and especially this ability. That would be Immortality Field, a very powerful ability in the right hands, and it's also very prominent in the current Origma meta. Are you seeing a correlation in the first two? Our final hero is Sigma, and what does he have? Well, for him it's actually two things. One of them I haven't talked about yet. The first is the Rock, or Accretion, which I talked about earlier, which has a heavy stun element to it. The second is the bigger one though, and that is Kinetic Grass, which is firmly what I believe the Overwatch devs would have put into the game if they'd had been able to go back and change D.Va's kit. It's effectively Defense Matrix 2.0. Not quite as powerful and potentially ridiculous, but can also be just as effective. So what do all these abilities have in common? Well, if you haven't worked it out yet, all of these abilities can negate ultimates. The potentially fight or even game-winning abilities that for some heroes take ages to build during the course of a round. Now let's get this clear. I don't have any problem with these abilities individually because as someone playing against it, if you're good enough you will be able to play around these abilities, noticing when they have been used and then still getting value out of your ult. In fact, as an ex-D.Va main who still has a love for playing the hero, I get an incredible feeling of self-fulfillment when eating an ult. I tend to feel sorry for some Zaryas, but for Hansa or Mei, I have no feeling of remorse and sometimes even a smirk will appear. But enough about me. The problem starts when you put all three of these heroes and their respective abilities together. If a team effectively rotates these abilities, they could fairly efficiently eat most of the ults coming out of the enemy team. Couple this with the fact that the past two heroes have been shipped with abilities that can shut down ults, and the fact that there is still a lot of CC in the game, the premonition I had was of a meta where ults are either never used or get no value when used. You can see this in the game now. In the current meta, Moira ults are becoming less effective at the Overwatch League level because Sigma just rocks her to stun her out of her ult, rendering it useless. We already know about how effective D.Va is for shutting down ulting Pharahs, Zaryas, McCrees, and pretty much everything else, but if something was to get through, the sponge-like absorbness? Me over here creating words right now. Anyway, if an ult gets through the sponge-like front line of this potential new meta, the Batiste will be waiting with his Immortality Field to deny any kills from the ult that made it through. I worry that if Blizzard add another hero with an ability that can shut down ults so effectively like this, we could be plunged into a meta where ults are worth nothing. This would obviously be another meta that would be looked extremely unfavourably on by the Overwatch community, higher tiers and lower tiers alike. But hey, it's pretty hard to please the Overwatch community when it comes to meta. But hey, they would have a good point to be upset. So that's the premonition I had. Of course, a lot of what I said is speculation, and it heavily depends on what the Overwatch devs do in terms of balance patches, and of course who the next few heroes are, and what abilities they have to bring to the table. There is always the thing that you never quite know what meta could be around the corner, but sometimes you can predict when you look at the changes the game has seen in recent times. Orisa being as strong as she is now could have been predicted by looking at the patch notes since her release, showing the constant buffs, but no one picked up on it. But I think it is fair to say that the next 6 months worth of updates and new heroes could be very telling for what direction the game goes down in this brave new world of role queue. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you have any ideas about what the next meta would look like, or what you'd like to see in the next meta, the return of Dive, or something a bit more exotic? I will leave it here for this video though. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.